All right, we are at the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining today's webinar, Managing the Chaos in File Shares. We appreciate you joining, and the first thing I'd like to do is take a second to introduce your speakers today. My name is Shayna Horka, and I work in product marketing here at Gimmal, and I am joined by our key speaker, Gimmal Solutions Architect, Jeff Tujetsch. And Jeff, I'm not seeing the slide advance forward on my end. I'm not sure if others are viewing that issue.
I'm having an issue with it, so bear with me here, please.
No problem. And I'm just going to go ahead and just cover a couple of housekeeping items while we figure out what's going on with our slide deck. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on your screen, and we're going to answer as many as we have time for during the end of the presentation. There will be at least one poll question that you'll see pop up in a separate window, so please keep an eye out for that, and all answers are anonymous, so we appreciate your participation. There it goes, working on my end now. Thanks, Jeff. I mean, as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so we can assist you. So if we actually want to go back just one slide, I have a couple of just quick slides here to tell you a little bit about Gimmal and how we can help you take control of your information. Gimmal is an information governance software company founded in 2002. Our mission is to help you achieve your information governance goals by providing solutions that help you balance the value your information provides with the risk it also presents. Whether you are trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, or migrate from legacy systems, or comply with policies across multiple repositories, Gimmal can help you achieve your information governance goals. We do this with a client success team and global network of partners that deliver solutions in conjunction with key partners like Microsoft and SAP. On the screen, you'll see Gimmal's family of software products. They work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive solutions include migration from legacy systems, file analysis and e-discovery, electronic and physical records management, and then document management for SAP content. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Jeff so he can kind of get to the meat of the presentation.
Thank you, Shane. I'm still suffering with some issues here and getting this to work I apologize. So I'm going to try to go back. I'm going to exit out of the presentation. I'm going to start it again. I apologize, everyone, for the delay.
No problem. And while we're doing some, troubleshooting, lots of people saying hi from the chat. We have people from Canada, Kansas City. So welcome, and we appreciate you being here.
Okay, we should be good to go. Sorry for the delay, everybody. Okay, so we're going to talk about the chaos of file shares. And I want to talk about the agenda today. What we're going to be discussing is the overview of unstructured data, talk about the risks and the costs of your unstructured data. And we're going to dive into file shares specifically, talk about the challenges and the process chronology that we recommend in managing your shares. Okay, so there are three types of unstructured data in the world that I live here. There is email, instant messaging, and storage. So regardless of the type of email, the instant messaging, we'll see different options for each. We're going to be specifically talking about file shares with storage. But keep in mind, the problem you have with unstructured data is not a vendor or software dependent problem. It is a business problem that pretty much everybody has issues with. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the statistics with unstructured data. When I found these, I was quite surprised, quite honestly, at some of these numbers. So first off, by 2025, 80% of data will be unstructured. That is a phenomenal amount. Going to the right of that, here we have 80% again of companies with their unstructured data. They are not satisfied with the performance. So meaning that, are they leveraging it properly? Are they managing it properly? As you can see with these stats, and then the next one being unstructured data is growing by 50% each year, Unstructured data is not going away. This is not a problem that you can say, well, I'll wait till next year when it'll be gone. That's not the case. Now is the time to get your arms around this. And then I'll challenge you. Are you satisfied with the performance of your unstructured data? So just something to think about. So when it comes down to unstructured data, I'm going to break it down to two different types. We have rot and we have non-rot. Rot being, if you haven't used that term or heard it, redundant, obsolete, or trivial data. So redundant meaning duplicates. For instance, somebody took a file and placed it in 3 different locations on your file share. That is a duplicate data. Obsolete. That's not to say this data wasn't once needed and valued, but it is no longer. Say, for instance, a project that 15 years ago ended, maybe we don't need that anymore. And then trivial, I'm not talking about pictures of your kids. This is more of things, maybe there are pictures, maybe pictures of the holiday party or a company lunch. This is the kind of data that we want to be able to separate from the other 5 categories that I broke down. First, we have privileged with the various things in here. I'm certain that you could add your own in this as well. Proprietary is also another category of your unstructured data. Sensitive, personal identifiable, so things that will uniquely identify a direct person. And then lastly, business information. So 2 through 5, obviously I'm certain you're already taking the steps necessary to secure this sensitive data, but we're going to talk about more than securing it. We're going to be talking about managing this data. So first thing with rot. This is an amazing stat as well. It can consume up to 75% of your file share data. And what we're seeing is typically obsolete is the highest percentage amount of that, with redundant being the lowest, excuse me. And what this means is that if you're sitting out there right now with 40 terabytes of file share, quite possibly up to 30 terabytes of that is rot. So it can be cleaned up and can be managed. Keep in mind, obviously, some obvious statements here. The more data you have, the harder it is for you to find anything in it, the longer for you to find it, as well as harder to manage. So real quick, we're going to look at some of the risks. First, we have data leakage. And I mean by this is something like maybe somebody has a laptop they put in their car was broken into and it was stolen, but on that laptop was some valuable information. Obviously, that's the risk of your unstructured data. Hacks and ransomware, we've all seen those things in the news too many times, also available of a problem that could happen. So my recommendation, never assume your data is safe, be vigilant, manage it properly and securely. And then the costs, specifically for file shares, we have the backups. As you know, most people in IT, 24 hours in a day is not long enough anymore. If you want to have data user accessible, as well as having your backups be done, a lot of backups now are done weekly. And the risk on that is, what if you had a data that you created on Monday and you're not backed up till Saturday and something happened to it? Obviously, you would lose that. So keeping your data under control for storage is wise. Storage is cheap, but throwing more storage at the problem is not going to solve your issue. And then the time it takes to manage these. And then obviously, we've also seen this in the news, fines and lawsuits. Nobody wants to have their company name in there. You got to make sure that you're, once again, managing that data. So let's go talk about how we can go out to your file shares and determine what we need to do. So there's some challenges here. Determining rot versus non-rot. So as I said, it's a very binary decision. Do I have data that I no longer need? And do I have data that I do need, but I want to possibly life cycle it, maybe keep it forever, but to be able to put restrictions and controls around it to best manage it. So with that said, how do we determine rot? Well, what can we use for those decision points? We can look at content. If we want to look at particular keywords, phrases, maybe regular expressions that can help you with things like the PII, finding social security numbers, what have you, we could do that. Maybe your folder structure is so well defined and rigid being a compliment, that users know exactly where they should place their data to make sure they're following all those rules. If your users are doing that, that is awesome, because that's really going to help you. So maybe you can use that to help you determine rot versus non-rot. The owner of the data, maybe that's a business owner or a particular specific owner. And then the properties, things such as the extension, the age. All those things can also be used in helping with these decisions. So what it's going to do is help us what files need to be secured, what needs to be lifecycled, help us determine those data owners. A lot of times business areas and departments are owners. And then going into labeling. Labeling, what I mean by that is actually doing some proactive work to be able to go through and look at the data. Typically, this involves content. So once again, going after the keywords. So what this is this is a proactive activity that we can go out and say, okay, I know this has PII in it. I'm going to put a PII label on it. Or I found the word contract somewhere within the Word document, for instance. I'm going to label that as a contract, or maybe it has an NDA. Whatever terms and phrases and logic that you can put around this to label these files. So all this criteria is crucial for you to determine how to manage your files. So I question you, do you have a folder structure that helps you determine ROT versus ROT? Is your folder structure that well defined? How are your data owners assigned? And what labels do you think you need? And I'll be honest, the labels you think you need, you're probably going to need more than what you think. And we're going to get into that as we go through and start assessing how we want to process all of this data. So once again, here are the various things we can use for files. I mean, files don't have that much metadata in order to take advantage of. And the things that we have are the ages, content, and as we see, the other properties and values. So let's talk about age a little bit. So I've actually had clients say, I'm going to use the modified date of a file to determine if it's ROT. It's like, okay, that's a great criteria if that's what you want to do. So then I posed to them this, like, okay, well, let's say we have a file that was last modified 10 years ago. Is that ROT for you? It might be, but what if it was last accessed yesterday? Okay, conversely, what if we have a file that was modified last year, but has never been accessed since? Which one of those is ROT? Well, that's part of the methodology that you're going to have to deploy and create a model for to help you be able to determine your ROT versus non-ROT. It is not going to be the same for everybody. So again, I say, which of these can you use? You can combine these for more focused criteria if you like, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But what I'm saying is that you don't just have to use one. Maybe we want to use the modification date and the last access date as criteria. In addition to that, maybe I want to use the extension. I know that movie files aren't something I need to keep. We don't make those as collateral within our company. I can probably get rid of those. Word documents, PowerPoints, those are something I want to keep. Can I base my decision solely on extension? I could if I wanted to. I could do the same thing with size, but you're going to have to be able to take these values and make those decisions. So one of the things I want to show you is in the next slide, as I went out and this is a report, ran for somebody and said, okay, we want to use the modified date. So what it does was, this is our Gimmal Discover product. And what it's doing is displaying the number of files and the total size of those files within each one of these range. I believe this was the modified date. So in this instance, anything between 15 and 20 years old, we got close to 225,000 of those. So what if the client came in and said, okay, anything older than 10 years old, that's ROT. It's like, really? Well, if you add these up, doing the math, that's close to 500,000 files. Are you sure you want to pull the trigger on that? So this is going to be an iterative process that you have to go through. And it's not easy. I'll be honest with you, but the longer you wait, the worse it's going to become. So here's some of those report permutations. So I could use maybe the age range and extension together, or the folder or the owner, or I'm going to flip it, do the extension first and then the age range. Keep in mind, these are the values and the metadata that you have available to you for files. Leverage those as much as you can. And the old adage of measure twice, cut once, well, I'm going to update that. I'm going to say measure 20 times and cut once. The reason being is make sure that what you're doing before you start remediating data, such as deleting it or moving it, something destructive to the data, make sure that you are actually guaranteed and feel high confidence that that file should be managed. Because if you don't, then obviously you've taken action on a file that you might need to be in the restore business, which nobody wants to be doing. So how do we do this? Well, I broke it down into two different sections, triage and manage. So once again, we want to separate the rot from the non-rot. So what we're doing on this is we're going to go through, and the first thing I recommend is we analyze the redundant files. Let's find those redundant files. Have a software that can go out and hash the files. And what I mean by that is actually go through the content. So regardless of what folder they're in, regardless of the file name, the extension, still have a software that can go through and find those duplicate files sitting out there. That's key. Once you've done that, remediate them. What's that going to do is you have to create a methodology of saying, okay, I have 5 files that exact same hash value, meaning they are duplicates of each other. Which one wins? You have to develop that methodology to be able to say, okay, the one with the most recent modification date, that's my winner. I need to do that. But before I remediate, I need to let the users know, hey, now the only instance of this file is going to live in a particular location. Because if you just start deleting things, users aren't going to find the duplicates that have been deleted, then obviously the help desk is going to be getting a lot of calls. So go through and perform this. Once again, this is not a small process to do either. Once you've done that, however, nominate a subset of your data. And what I mean by this is start with the location of your data that you have the best understanding of what's in there. You have a good idea of what kind of files are in there. Are they contracts again, invoices, PII, whatever it might be, recipes, but be able to understand what's in there and then start labeling. And how you're going to label. Am I going to be using content? Most likely, but you can use other properties of that as well. So go through and say, okay, I think I have all my keywords for the various kind of labels that I want to assign to this data. So I'm going to make my first pass. Okay, great. 40% of the files are labeled. Okay, that means I still have 60%. Do I declare those as rot? Probably not. What I would go through, start doing a random sampling on the files that have yet to be labeled and say, oh, I didn't think about that particular keyword or phrase. Go back up the label files, do this over and over until you feel confident. What you're doing is creating that methodology that you can apply to other locations of that data as well. So you're able to go through and say, okay, I'm getting my feet wet with something I know about, and then I can apply that to data with which I'm not as familiar. Then I want to analyze all those non-labeled files and once again, do all this process. Once I've done that, you're going to want to set up a perpetual policy or a process to label all your deltas. Deltas being any additions or modifications to existing files sitting out there. Because what we want to do is we want this to be a perpetual process. So first, we're going to go through the historical data and do that. Then we want to make sure that anything new added to this location is going to also be labeled properly. And then also have a report for those that fall through, because if you had non-labeled files, either they are rot like you intend, or they are files that fell through your criteria, once again, maybe keywords of which you didn't think. So that way you can go through and add to this and run it through again. So now you have this working on a perpetual basis of the nominate through the perpetual report of all non-labeled files. You have that process working. Now let's move on to the next one. Hence, lather, rinse, repeat. So be methodical, be analytical, determine what's the best label criteria for you. So here's an example of our Gimmal Discover product. It went through and it assigned labels based upon what it found. So it found some PHI or personal health information, personal identifiable information. It found credit cards, invoices, contracts, what have you. Once again, these labels should be customizable with whatever software you're using, be able to apply them based upon the logic that you dictate. That way you have control over, again, of these labels being assigned. So this is key. So this is going through and you should be seeing these numbers grow as you go through, and they might even diminish. I mean, you might break down PII into other categories if you so choose, but you need to make sure that you're assigning those. In fact, if you know some data is rot and it's falling through your criteria, you could actually assign a rot label if you so choose, just so you don't have any unlabeled results at all. Your call. Okay, so we've gone through and we got rid of our rot. Now what do we do with this? Okay, now we are ready to actually have this file be managed like a record, be official in its management. So we need to have something that is an automated product that can go through and take those files and be able to say, I'm going to perform steps on them. I could lock them, which prevents modification or deletion, because I'm going to say this is a record and I don't want anybody managing it. That is an optional step, of course. You're going to classify these. And when I say classify, for those of you who have ever seen any records management, basically it's going through a file plan and assigning based upon classification rules, which I'll have an example in the next slide. It's saying, how do I want to use the metadata of the record of the files to be able to determine what classification, what retention and life cycle are assigned to those. So I want to say, okay, I have this particular type of file. It has a 10-year life cycle. After 10 years, I can delete it. So that's what this manage is doing, is to helping you get through that whole process to assign this automated retention. We can disposition it, meaning delete it, or we can move it somewhere else. Have a full audit trail so you can always have a way of saying, this is what happened to this file as it went through its life cycle. And then even go as far as creating a destruction certificate to be able to say, yes, I did have this file and I deleted it, but I want to maintain the properties and the audit trail. I could have all that at my disposal. So at any time I can go back historically and look at that data. So this is what is actually part of our Gimmal Records product, what it does. So Gimmal Discover was helping us to being able to label those files to get rid of the rot. Once Gimmal Discover's done its work, now we pass the baton on to Gimmal Records in this case and say, now go manage this as a record within the environment. So here is an example of a classification rule for Gimmal Records. So it's basically saying that if the repository is a file system for file shares, and the third level folder is PII data. So in this environment, their users are very aware of where any PII file should be placed. We're going to place it in a folder or a subfolder under PII data. So I'm going to keep all of my PII in one place. I know it's not dispersed throughout my environment. However, those darn users don't always do exactly what they're told. So we have an option here. So this is going back to Gimmal Discover, and it's saying, okay, I found PII in a file. I assigned a label to it. Now Gimmal Records is actually using that label to be able to properly classify it. So there's some synergy between our two products to be able to do that. So whatever you're using, make sure that if you can apply those labels, that your official records management software has the ability to actually use that label that was assigned, typically via the content. And here we have another screenshot of Gimmal Records. You're going to notice the file system, actually a SharePoint record snuck in here. But this is just showing us different files and how they've been managed. So each one of these classifications or record class is actually assigning the record a different retention. Some might live 5 years. Some might be locked immediately and deleted after 3. And that is all at your discretion. So whatever records management software you're using, make sure you have the ability to fully customize this file plan so that you can assign the disposition appropriately and manage each file in the way you want. So they're classified, they're life cycled, and possibly they're dispositioned. So what have we gone through today? Well, we went through and talked about unstructured data and how the different categories of that. We talked about the risk and the cost of that unstructured data. And then we talked about the challenges. We had those challenges of how do I determine what I need to secure, what I need to manage, and what I can get rid of. Then we talked about the rot and the non-rot, being able to do that. And then lastly, making sure that we go into a formal records management of all the files that are within your file system that need to be truly managed, that are business records that need to be processed. And with that, that is the presentation for the file chaos. I hope that helped with give you some idea of what to do. I mean, my best recommendation is, it's sort of like the old statement, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Take this in pieces. Don't try to tackle the whole thing at once. once again, go up to that data that you know, get comfortable with your process, and then you can start moving on to other data.
Great, and I'll go ahead and take over from here. Thank you so much, Jeff. Jeff went into a couple of different methodologies, a little bit about our software as well and how we can help out. If you'd like more information, even if it's kind of a thought leadership conversation, you should see a poll question pop up on your screen. It's a yes or no question, and we will reach out to you if you decide you do want more information. So Jeff, we have 5 minutes for Q&A.
Okay.
We actually have a good amount of questions in the chat.
Awesome.
So I'm just going to start rattling them off for you to answer.
Okay, please do.
So the first one is, can you report on the last viewed and by whom?
Last viewed and by whom? No, we can say the last time a file was accessed, which would be viewed, but by whom? No, that information is not captured in the typical file share environment.
And then the next one is, can you replace redundant file instances with in-place links to whichever instance was determined to be authoritative?
Oh, good question. So yes, you can. Do you want to go through and do links? I know I have seen links be applied that will allow you, basically when they look like they're opening the loser file, if you want to call it that, that it actually takes them over to the winner. Yes, that is something that now do we do that in Gimmal Discover? We do not currently do that, however, but I have seen links be created before, I think manually actually.
Okay, and the next one we have is, can you do an almost duplicate characterization? Because variants of a document often differ only slightly.
No, it's going to be very binary. Either they are a duplicate or they are not.
And then the next one is, does this software have preset configurations for PII, PCI, CUI, or do you build the rules?
You can build the rules yourself. Obviously, with Gimmal services, we can help you with, especially with when you're going into the regular expression world looking for PII. That's something we can definitely help you with. Unless you're have experience with regex, it's a very interesting piece of logic that you have to use to create those. But by all means, if you need help, we can help you. But if you want to fly solo on that, you can as well.
And the next one is, do you recommend managing files by extension?
You can, if you can discern that all particular file extensions are either rot or non-rot. Absolutely. Like in my example, if it's an AVI file and you say, well, look, we don't ever make any movie files that are used within our business, it must be rot. If you can draw that dark line, then absolutely.
Great. And is it a requirement to lock every file?
It is not. So in Gimmal Records, you do not have to lock a file. So for instance, I actually had somebody I talked with last week giving a Gimmal Records demo. And they said, what if I don't want to lock a file? Then I said, then don't. It's totally up to you. If you have a file that is, maybe it's an HR policy, that'd probably be something that would be breathing, living, and it changes as it goes. Maybe you wouldn't want to lock that. But if you have something that is static and is not requiring any changes, that would be a good lock candidate.
Great. And the next one we have is, how do you recommend determining if files are actually needed?
Oh boy, that is a loaded question. So that is going to be based upon your business, quite honestly. I wish I could give you an answer that is under these conditions, it's needed, under these, it's not. But that's going to be something that you're going to have to determine based upon using your criteria. It's probably going to be different for everybody.
Awesome. And the last one, unless another one sneaks in there, is, can the data owners be responsible for managing rot?
Yes, they can. So one of the things that Gimmal Discover can do is, if we know who the data owner is, obviously, and we can go through their particular section of the data, be it a UNC path or a particular file share, and send them a report. In that report, then, they would have the ability to actually tag the rows in the report. So this is not labeling like I was talking about with the classification, but this is tagging the report row items. And they could tag it with a tag of, say, delete. What you could then do is run a policy against the report, and every row that had a delete tag on it, we would then be able to go out, find that file, and remove it from the share. So there is a way of doing an analysis as well as allowing the data owner to make that final decision if a file should be kept. Because quite honestly, I don't think an admin is going to know the answer to all those. The data owner is the best source.
Great, and that actually wraps up the Q&A, which times perfectly to the end of the webinar. Oh, somebody put a little bit of a chat. It says, as a practical matter, the data owners are the only ones who can effectively manage rot. Tools like this provide assistance to them. And then it says, without such tools, it's a rare data owner who will spend time to keep it cleaned up.
That's for sure. I mean, here's a couple analogies I have for you real quick. So if you buy a new house, do you empty your closet before you move, or do you do it after? Typically you do it before, right? The same kind of thing. And then another analogy is when you move and you put all your kitchen utensils into a box, as you use them, you put them into the drawer. Anything that's in the box a year later, well, you probably don't need it. So it's the same, that's that last access kind of methodology to be able to go through and say, nobody's accessing this. Do we need this information any longer?
Great. And Jeff, if you want to just move it on to the next slide. If anybody has any more questions or comments or wants to reach out to one of us, our contact information is on the next slide. We both have kind of hard names, I would say, to remember. So if you want to make it easier for yourself on our last slide, you can just email info@gimmal.com or visit our website at www.gimmal.com. For those interested in the recording of this webinar, I know there were some comments of people who had to leave early. It will be sent out via email in the form of a thank you for joining today's webinar email, or if you simply registered and couldn't make it, you will also get the email. But we thank everybody for joining today, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.